Goals, dreams, moving forward. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. No one can tell about us better than ourselves. Watch the block of programs of TV BRICS International Network on Umthala TV, South Africa. Lourens Steytler, founder and chairman at the South African Anglo-Boer War Historical Society, born on the 28th of June 1965, graduated from Queen's College in Eastern Cape, also got a diploma from Financial Planning Institute. Amateur historian, entrepreneur, business consultant and financial advisor, founder and executive of multiple entrepreneur small business enterprises and independent business consultant to personal client base. Married, lives in South Africa.
Mr. Steytler, good day. Thank you so much for your coming here in Moscow. I'm very glad to see you here. I suppose you like here in Moscow. Okay, once again, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Mr. Steytler, you are the head of Military Historical Society of the Legacy of the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa. And it is no coincidence your position. After all, your ancestor participated in this war. All of us took place more than a century ago, but your grandparents must have told you everything in details, I suppose. Could you share with us who your ancestor was and what role the Russian Empire played in that war?
Well, my great-grandfather, who participated in this Anglo-Boer War, was 22 when he joined the war effort. And many young South African Boervolk joined the commandos to fight for the Boers. My great-grandfather was then captured by the British, because that's what the war was about. And he was put on a ship and sent to a concentration camp in Ceylon. Ceylon is today Sri Lanka. But upon his arrival on the ship, there was about 620 Boer on that ship, heading for the concentration camp. Upon arriving, he decided he was not going to be incarcerated in a foreign country. And so him and 4 friends made an escape, and they swam in the sea approximately 3.5 miles, where they were picked up by a Russian ship. The ship was the SS Kherson, which was a naval ship from the Black Sea Fleet. And the first officer, Captain Vladimir Petrov Kisimov, hid them away on the ship, and they then were declared the honorable guests of the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II. So they traveled through the Black Sea and ended up in St. Petersburg, where they spent quite a bit of time. They then returned to South Africa through the Netherlands. They met up with Paul Kruger, who was at that point our president in exile. And they met up with him and then moved back to South Africa to join up with the commandos again, to join the war effort. And later on, my great-grandfather also became a member of the, which would now be the parliament. So he was a member of the Volksraad, which is a member of the House of Representatives to the governing British Empire at that point. So he served from 1924 in the Parliament of South Africa until approximately 1938-39, somewhere around there.
So we haven't mentioned the name of your ancestor.
I carry his name. So his name was Lourens Jacobus Steytler. So hence, it is a family name which is handed down. I am also then Lourens Steytler.
So we haven't empathized the question, the role of Russian Empire. Well, slightly you have told us, but what happened then? Did Russia help South Africa?
Yes, indeed. And this is where our love for the Russian people was founded, I think. You know, in the 1900s, the Russian Empire found it, for whatever reason, they found it necessary to go and assist the Boervolk in this Anglo-Boer War, and approximately 300 odd people from Russia went at their own cost on a ship to South Africa to go and assist mainly in the medical field. So there were field hospitals put up, doctors and nurses from Russia which went to assist the Boer in the war. And that essentially is all I know about the Russians. But in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of interaction between Russian historians and the Boer folk of today to commemorate the Russians which assisted the Boer folk in the 1900s in the war.
So I have a little kind of historical fact. During the Anglo-Boer War, some 270 Russian volunteers fought in the ranks of Boer armies. In 1900, Russian Red Cross and Russian Dutch ambulance units were deployed in South Africa, which provided medical assistance, as you have already said, to both combatants and civilians. They say that this support laid a foundation for future Russian-South Africa relations. So I suppose you totally agree with this.
I do. You know, there is a new movement which they call the Russophile movement. This would be the people who are friends of Mother Russia. But actually the Boer folk have been so-called Russophile since the 1900s, because we have known this history. We have known the Russian people as a family, as a group of people in South Africa since the 1900s. Every family that had to do with the war, the Anglo-Boer War, has known that the Russians came to assist. In fact, when my great-grandfather spent some time in St. Petersburg, one of the Russian generals assured him that there were thousands of Russian soldiers who were ready to depart to South Africa, but they needed to have safe passage. And if the Boer could guarantee them safe passage to South Africa, they would go on their own cost to fight with the Boer folk in the Anglo-Boer War.
You have told me that you are Boer.
Yes.
Boers, who are they?
It's an ethnic group of historically farming community which are descendant from German, Dutch, French, and possibly Nordic ancestry. So the Boer has a home language of Afrikaans, which is my first language as well. But there are many Afrikaans-speaking South Africans who are not ethnically Boer. For instance, there are many, approximately 8 million colored South Africans. These are South Africans who are inherently Afrikaans-speaking, and they have their own ethnic culture, but they are not Boer. So the Boer folk are a very much smaller group, and our heritage stems from the very first Europeans who came to South Africa and arrived in 3 ships and started to farm the land and started to grow crops and farm with sheep and cattle, etc.
In September 2021, 2 years ago almost, in South Africa, a plaque has been unveiled commemorating Russian volunteers who had fought in the Anglo-Boer War.
Yes.
I know that you have attended the opening of
Yes.
the memorial, so what feelings did it evoke in you?
I have attended a number of those unveilings because the Russian historians have been commemorating the Russian soldiers who paid the highest price and died in South Africa fighting with the Boers in the Anglo-Boer War. And so when attending these ceremonies, the inherent feeling, although I was not there, the inherent feeling from the history stories which we have learned come to the fore. You know, I have my great-grandfather's memoirs, which he wrote before he died, and he tells all of the details of the war and his capture and his escape and his return and all of the story of how the Russian people assisted him and his 4 friends. And the only thing that you can think of at a commemoration ceremony like that is, wow, what a tremendous, proud moment to celebrate both the victory of the people over war, because war never has a victor, both from the Russian side and the Boer side as well. So it is, I wouldn't say emotional, but it does invoke feelings of pride.
Okay, so the memorials are opened only in South Africa or in Russia as well?
I'm not sure about Russia. I think there may be, but I have attended a number of them, which the plaques were all laid down at old historical concentration camp sites. So the Russians know about the concentration camps where the Boers and some Russians were incarcerated, and the plaques were laid down at those sites, which no longer obviously exist, but are just a historical site.
So I suppose you're not the only one ancestor in South Africa of the Boer War. Do you communicate with other people?
Yes, I do. And in fact, we often on social media interact and find legitimate ancestors of people, and the surnames are all connected, you know. What I really would like to do is connect with the ancestors of Captain Vladimir Kisimov, the first officer of the ship which picked up my grandfather. And I have searched for nearly 20 years to find the Russian ancestry of Captain Vladimir Kisimov, but unsuccessful on internet. So I also thought it may be a good time, whilst I'm in Russia, to connect with some of the Orthodox churches in Russia, because the churches may have records of the Kisimov family, and just maybe we can find some of the ancestors of Captain Kisimov, where I can shake their hand and say thank you. In my house, I have a portrait of Captain Kisimov and the ship, the SS Kherson, which has been handed down from generation to generation. So I am the fourth generation from Lourens Steytler, my great-grandfather who fought in the war. My grandfather, his son, is obviously my father's father. And we have a connection with the history of the war, but also the Russian people who are directly connected to us as a family, and obviously the Anglo-Boer War. A number of books have already been written, and these have been well researched, and the factual information has been laid down in these books. And some of those books have already been translated into Russian.
So we have spoken about the treatment of Russians and Russian Empire to the South Africans at that time. What about nowadays? How do South Africans treat Russia nowadays, and is there communication between our peoples?
The South African people, by and large, are very friendly towards the Russians, because we have a history with the Russians. Other than the so-called period, or the period of the USSR, which was a political regime, it did not have any bearing on the people of Russia. We know the hearts of the people of Russia. And there is interaction, and there is a big support. I have a following of approximately 300,000 people in South Africa who are all pro-Russian people. We must distinguish the difference between the people and the political regimes. They always get in the way of history. But the people stay the same. And the respect for the people is born out of and known because we have a very similar culture to the Boer folk and the Russian folk. The Boer folk are traditionally a orthodox, conservative, family, farming and industrious community. So we find similarities, many similarities in the Russian people.
So, what do you think? At what level are cultural ties between Russia and South Africa now, and are there cultural exchanges between our countries?
Too few, I think. And I think the distance of the countries plays a role. However, there's not enough media, there's not enough interaction at a level of declaring that we should get together and so on. And this is part of what I try to do with the Historical Society, is to try and get Russians and South Africans who are like-minded about the similarities and the friendships to grow. But I think it is far too little, and I think we should do more. And I think that should start at a university level and an exchange student level at schools. Maybe we should interact with the schools here. And the language barrier is a bit of a thing. You know, in fact, I have had some very successful talks with some people in Russia who have offered to do an online course for Russia for South African people. So one of the things I will be doing when I go back to South Africa is to introduce this online Russian language course to anyone who wants to accept it, so that they can learn to speak the Russian language. That would make it easier for us to interact culturally as well. Taking the time and creating the space for people to visit South Africa and also visit Russia. One of the things I want to do is to get a contingent of people to come across to Russia so that they can experience the Russian culture, because when they go back they will tell 10 people each, and so but it's not a quick fix, you know. It is a long-term thing, and we have to build friendships and break down seemingly barriers over a time period.
In your opinion, are political, economic, technical ties between our countries at a sufficient level of interaction today, and what should be emphasized?
Politicians should pay attention to the fact that the bridges of communication and interaction and business should be enhanced. And they should involve the peoples who are already established with communication to say, come, how should we do this? Because we all know that politicians have their own work to do, and they work on an official level, and there are things that they should focus on more than others. But there are many South Africans who already interact with Russia, and there are many Russians who live in South Africa. I don't know if you know that. There are tens of thousands of Russian families in South Africa who have a very prosperous life, and who we get together with on a regular basis. Most of them are war veterans, ex-soldiers like myself. I'm a war veteran from a different era. And we get together and we interact. And sometimes business happens there, but also cultural bonds get strengthened there.
So about business a little bit. South Africa is committed to supporting and developing small and medium businesses with Russia. Assess the benefits and challenges of doing business in South Africa, and can you share an advice with Russian businessmen who want to enter South Africa and to work there?
Well, the benefits don't have to be brought out. I mean, the benefits are obvious. It would be mutually beneficial for both countries to have business ties, small and medium business ties, not only on the large business scale. Once again, I think that these business ties and these business communications are not being opened up. And although we would like to, we don't have the channels. There are no official channels for that. And so we have been busy on an unofficial scale, on unofficial channels, trying to establish that. Just in this last week, I have managed to connect with some business people in Russia, but that is unofficially. And although it would fit very perfectly into what we want to do, and it will, there is no real forthcoming support from the official channels. And I think they should strengthen that.
So do you have any further plans on war? I mean, any memorials opening, books publishing, or something like that?
Not personally myself. However, in South Africa, as the founder of the Historical Society of the Anglo-Boer War, we will continue to express the facts of the Anglo-Boer War and the Russian interaction, and also that bleeds into the cultural similarities, and it also whets the appetite for people to come and visit Russia, and maybe they will even. There are many stories which have not been uncovered yet from families in South Africa who say, my great-grandfather told me about this Russian, whoever he may be, who assisted us, or whatever.
And what else can we do to unite our peoples, and how successful this undertaking will be?
I think it's important for the official channels, the chambers of business in both countries. And I do not know how advanced the Russian Chamber of Business is, but I do know that there's a lethargic non-existence of official channels from South Africa, none that I know of actually. And if I don't, and if I'm wrong, then I apologize, but I have tried to find official channels of small business communication, small business interaction with Russia, but it doesn't seem to exist. And I think that's where we should start, that the official channels should open the bridges more, and then that will be populated. The interaction will be populated by the businessmen of South Africa and also the businessmen of Russia. I've found in my week that I've been here in Moscow that the Russian business people are very keen to do business with any supporting partners. And we are very keen to talk to any partner that wants to do business with us. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we have to find markets, we have to entice business, we have to ensure that payments get done back and forth. And this, I think, is probably the biggest challenge, capital, and also the movement of finance, the movement of monies between countries may be a challenge. I don't know, I'm not a financier. But if I produce something which is in demand in Russia, then surely the Russian people will pay for it. But how does that payment move back to South Africa? And these are things that are important, because I think there are too many roadblocks in the way of actually getting the business done. Too much red tape, I think.
So do you think that our peoples can have a common future together?
I think we can, and I think we will. Because entrepreneurs, business people, have a tendency, have a historic way of finding solutions. But we have to work at it, and we have to be supported by the official structures. So there's always this two tiers. We have the official structure and the unofficial structure. And I think the official structures should open the doors and open the way for us not only to communicate in business terms, but also education. I think it's vitally important that we have an exchange program where skills can be taught in Russia to South African students, South African workers, and vice versa. We may have something to offer in South Africa which Russian people can come and learn. And that in itself will create huge advances in the communication. And I'm talking about not only verbal communication, but finance communication, technological communication, import and export communication, etc.
It's such a wonderful thing that you are doing. You're trying to widen the borders between Russians and South Africans.
Yes.
You try to unite these people, our people. And I wish you good luck. I wish
Thank
you
you.
all best.
Thank
and
you.
I hope you will have a success.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming once again.
Thank you.